The sound that announces a duchess's social execution is not a guillotine's fall, but a collective, indrawn breath. It swept through the grand ballroom of Blackwood Manor tonight, a sharp hiss of scandal that momentarily silenced the orchestra. From the top of the marble staircase, my husband, Duke Alastair, descended. On his arm was not I, his wife of 6 years, but Isabel de Courtenay, her crimson gown a slash of defiance against the muted elegance of the aristocracy. He led her past me, his eyes gliding over my existence as if I were a piece of inconveniently placed furniture. He did not stop until they reached the ducal table. Our table. With a theatrical flourish, he pulled out the chair meant for the Duchess of Blackwood. My chair. Isabel, with a glance of triumphant pity in my direction, took her seat. Then Alastair turned. 100 pairs of eyes followed his gaze to me, standing alone in the shadow of a Doric column. He did not speak. He simply gestured, a flick of his fingers, toward a small solitary table by the frosted glass of the conservatory doors. A table for a governess. A ghost. The whispers began then, a venomous tide. Lady Danforth's fan fluttered faster. The Duke of Carrington studied the ceiling with sudden fascination. They saw a woman discarded, humiliated, broken. They were wrong. I felt no sting of shame. I felt only the cold, satisfying click of the final piece of a puzzle falling into place. For 6 years, they had watched him sideline me, pitying the silent, barren Duchess. They thought this was my end. They believed they were witnessing a public coronation for his mistress. What they failed to understand was that they were attending a meticulously planned execution, and the guest of honor was not me. If you wish to know how a reputation is built over years and destroyed in a single night, stay. The most important lessons are delivered in silence. Our engagement portrait was meant to immortalize a perfect union. Instead, it captured the first lie. The artist adjusted the light 3 times, frustrated. "Your Grace, if you could look at your wife, just for a moment." Alastair didn't move. His hand rested on my shoulder, firm, possessive, but his gaze was fixed above us, not on me, on the towering portrait of the late Duke. "Ensure the Blackwood jawline is prominent," he instructed. "It is the signature of our lineage." The painter hesitated. His eyes flicked from the old Duke's portrait to Alastair's face, then to mine. I saw the moment the doubt entered the room. I said nothing, but I remembered. The second fracture revealed itself at a private dinner, weeks later. He introduced her as a distant cousin, Isabel de Courtenay. She moved through the room as if she had always belonged there, not like a guest, but like someone returning to her rightful place. When the conversation turned to the Blackwood crest, Alastair spoke confidently, and she corrected him, gently, precisely. "No, Alastair," she said, her tone almost indulgent. "The wolf does not represent ferocity. It represents the protector who assumes the title when the primary line is compromised." Silence fell. A fork slipped from the Dowager Duchess's hand. I watched it hit the porcelain. No one acknowledged it, but everyone felt it. I didn't look at Isabel. I looked at his mother. Her face had already given the answer. The third moment was not subtle. It was deliberate. At the midwinter ball, he presented me with pearls, appropriate, modest, expected. And then she arrived, wearing the Blackwood ruby brooch, a piece reserved for the matriarch of the house. I had seen it in the ducal vault that very morning. He led me into the ballroom, and then left. No explanation, no hesitation. He crossed the floor and took her hand for the opening waltz. Every eye followed. The music swelled, and I stood alone. Again. They believed they were witnessing the beginning of a scandal. A husband in love with another woman, a duchess too weak to stop it. They were wrong. I wasn't watching a betrayal. I was watching a performance. A man trying too hard to prove something he did not possess. A woman who knew exactly where every weakness lay. And a room full of witnesses, too distracted by romance to notice the truth. That night, I stopped asking what my husband was hiding from me and started asking a far more interesting question. Why was he so desperate to convince everyone he belonged here? From that moment on, I stopped being his wife and became his observer. And in a house built on legacy, there is nothing more dangerous than someone quietly studying the foundation. My social exile became my greatest asset. While Alistair and Isabel were occupied performing their charade for the aristocracy, I was left to my own devices. Blackwood Manor became my chessboard, and its vast, silent library my war room. It was there, amidst the scent of aging paper and leather, that I began to notice the inconsistencies that others were too distracted to see. The first crack appeared on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. I found Alistair in the West Wing library, a wing he famously detested, calling it a mausoleum of forgotten men. He was not reading. He was standing before a row of leather-bound volumes, the private ledgers of the previous dukes, with an air of frantic desperation. His hands were coated in a fine layer of dust, and one of the heavy tomes lay open on the desk. He slammed it shut the moment he saw me. "What are you doing here?" he snapped, his voice sharp with something that sounded like fear. "This is a library, Alistair. I was looking for a book on botany," I replied calmly, my eyes lingering on the volume he'd just closed. It was his father's. "This is not for you," he said, gesturing vaguely at the shelves. "Ducal records. Family matters." He straightened his coat, trying to regain his composure, but his defensiveness was a blaring alarm. A man secure in his position does not guard his history like a starving dog guards a bone. He was not protecting his legacy. He was searching for a threat to it. The second crack came from his mother, the Dowager Duchess. At a luncheon she hosted, Lord Ashworth remarked cheerfully that Alistair was the very image of the late Duke. A simple, flattering pleasantry. The Dowager's smile froze, a porcelain mask of panic. "Oh, not at all," she said, her voice a little too high, a little too quick. "Alistair favours my side entirely. The Ashworth features, the Blackwood traits, well, they can be rather unpredictable." The table fell into an awkward silence. To deny such a compliment was bizarre. To sever the paternal resemblance so publicly was unthinkable. I glanced at Isabel, seated across from me. She wasn't looking at the Dowager. She was watching me, a faint, knowing smile playing on her lips. She had heard it too, and she understood its significance. That was the moment I realized I was not merely an inconvenient wife in a love triangle. I was an obstacle in a much larger, more desperate conspiracy. They weren't trying to control a narrative about an affair. They were fighting to conceal a fundamental flaw in the foundation of the Blackwood line. The great secret was not that my husband loved another woman. It was that he was terrified he was not his father's son, and I knew with absolute certainty that the proof he was so frantically searching for was hidden somewhere in this library, the one place he was too arrogant to believe I could ever truly master. The late Duke did not trust paper. That was the first truth I uncovered, not from his ledgers, but from what was missing. Dates that should have aligned, didn't. Names that should have appeared, vanished. Entire weeks of his life reduced to silence. It wasn't carelessness, it was design. The first time I tested my suspicion, I chose a volume Alistair had tried to hide. His father's private ledger, the same one he had closed too quickly when he saw me. I opened it again, slowly this time. Not reading, observing. Patterns reveal themselves to those who wait. Between certain pages I noticed something peculiar. Pressed flowers, perfectly preserved, always placed at irregular intervals. At first glance, decorative. At second, deliberate. I did not rush to understand it. Rushing is what exposes intent. Instead, I began visiting the greenhouse more often, learning the names, the structures, the classifications, which flowers bloom together, which never should, and which had meaning beyond beauty. Weeks later, I returned to the ledger. This time, I did not read the words. I followed the flowers, each one marking a shift, a deviation, a message hidden in plain sight. The entries no longer contradicted each other. They aligned, too perfectly. The truth did not arrive all at once. It unfolded, quietly. The dowager's prolonged absence one summer, a name repeated, but never fully written, a child, referenced only through implication, and finally, a line that did not belong to a duke, but to a man making a decision he could never reverse. I closed the book before reaching the end. I already knew enough. Alistair wasn't searching for confirmation. He was searching for denial. From that moment on, everything changed. His obsession with lineage, his need to be seen, his hostility toward the past. It was not arrogance, it was fear. But the ledger held more than his secret. And this time, I kept reading. The name appeared once, carefully avoided elsewhere, a brother, erased from portraits, absent from conversation, but present in the margins. And then, a child, not acknowledged, not legitimized, but not forgotten. I did not react. I did not confront. I did not even allow myself the satisfaction of certainty. Because truth, when revealed too early, loses its power. Instead, I asked a simpler question. If Alistair was not meant to inherit, then who was? The answer did not come from the page. It came from memory, from a voice correcting him too easily, from a woman who never hesitated, who never questioned her place, who never asked for permission. Isabel. By the time I closed the final ledger, this was no longer a question of betrayal, or even identity. It was a question of succession. And for the first time, I understood that I was not witnessing a scandal. I was standing inside a war. And both sides believed they were about to win. They were wrong. Because neither of them had realized one very simple thing. I had already chosen the ending. Knowledge, I learned, is not a shield, it is a blade. The art is in choosing where and when to cut. My war would not be fought with raised voices in private rooms, but with calculated whispers in the grandest halls of the aristocracy. My first move was aimed at the very heart of Alistair's insecurity, his supposed resemblance to his father. I arranged for the grand portrait of the late Duke, a magnificent piece by a renowned artist, to be moved from the dim West Wing gallery to the main reception hall under the pretense of having it professionally cleaned and revarnished. Suddenly, the old Duke was a silent guest at every social gathering. Guests would arrive, offer their compliments on the restoration, and then their eyes would inevitably drift from the portrait's sharp aquiline features to Alistair's softer, rounder face. No one said a word, but they didn't have to. The comparison was constant, a silent judgment hanging in the air. I would watch Alistair's jaw tighten as he caught Lord Ashworth or the Duke of Carrington studying the painting, then glancing at him. The whispers grew louder. The question of his paternity was no longer a drunken slip. It was a society parlor game. My second move was for Isabel. I knew she was waiting for Alistair to make a fatal error. I decided to give her a reason to believe that moment was imminent. I took to spending my afternoons in the public reading rooms of a prestigious ladies' club, a known hive of gossip. On my table, placed just so, I always had a conspicuous volume, Precedents of Annulment in Noble Houses. Lady Danforth, a woman whose tongue moved faster than her carriage horses, took the bait within a week. "My dear Duchess," she cooed, her eyes wide with false sympathy. "Such academic reading. Is everything quite well at Blackwood Manor?" "One must be prepared for all eventualities, Lady Danforth," I replied with a serene smile. "An education is a woman's only true inheritance." The news spread through the ton like wildfire. The poor Duchess of Blackwood was researching her own demise. Isabel heard the news, of course. I saw the change in her immediately, a new boldness, a triumphant gleam in her eye. She began to overplay her hand, openly correcting Alistair's management of the estate finances in front of his steward, advising him on political appointments as if she were already his duchess. She believed I was a spent force, preparing for surrender. She was, in fact, walking into a trap I had baited with her own ambition. Alistair, sensing my supposed weakness and spurred on by Isabel's confidence, became reckless. He announced the annual Blackwood Gala would be the most magnificent event of the season, a celebration of the Blackwood lineage. It was a desperate public attempt to silence the rumors with sheer opulence. He intended it to be his ultimate triumph and my final humiliation. He didn't know that I had already sent copies of the deciphered ledger pages, along with a discreet letter outlining the location of the original codicil, to the royal solicitor. Not the family's man, but the king's. A man whose loyalty was to the crown and the integrity of the peerage, not to the convenience of a single ducal house. The gala was his chosen stage. It would be mine as well. The night he chose to replace me was the night the room chose to erase him. The Blackwood Gala glittered with excess, gold, crystal, titles, and beneath it all, anticipation. They had come to witness my end. I descended last, not as a wife, not as a victim, but as a question no one could yet answer. The moment I stepped into the light, the room shifted. Not dramatically, not loudly, but enough. Enough for them to notice what I wore. The tears of Blackwood. Diamonds reserved for a duchess whose place was unquestioned. Alistair saw it, and for the first time in 6 years, he hesitated. Isabel did not. She smiled, because she still believed this night belonged to her. Dinner passed in careful silence. No one asked, no one commented, but everyone was watching, waiting. Alistair rose before the final course was cleared. Too early, too eager. A man rushing towards something he did not understand. Tonight, he began, lifting his glass, we honor the strength of legacy and the courage to embrace truth. His voice carried, confident, practiced, desperate. He turned toward Isabel, and the room followed, like it always had. For too long, he continued, we have allowed appearances to dictate our lives, but there comes a moment when one must choose authenticity over obligation. A pause, measured, rehearsed. I will not continue in a union built on formality alone, and for that reason I have instructed my solicitor to begin proceedings. Your Grace. No one saw the doors open. That was the first sign. Sir Malcolm Finch did not interrupt. He arrived, and the difference between those two things is power. The temperature in the room changed, subtly, irreversibly. Alistair turned, irritation already forming, then stopped, because he recognized the man who had just taken control of his evening. On behalf of the Crown, Sir Malcolm said, his voice calm enough to command silence, I must request your immediate attention regarding a matter of succession. No one moved. Even the orchestra stilled. A document was extended. Alistair did not take it. His hand hovered, because something in him already understood. This was not a negotiation. The private ledgers of the late Duke, Sir Malcolm continued, have now been authenticated, alongside a sealed codicil to his will. A murmur flickered, then died. The conclusion is definitive. Silence, not polite, not curious, total. The direct male line of the House of Blackwood ended with the previous Duke. The words did not echo, they landed. The glass slipped from Alistair's hand. It did not shatter, it rolled across the marble, slowly, deliberately, loud enough for everyone to hear what had just happened. No, he said, but it was not denial, it was recognition. Sir Malcolm turned, not to me, to Isabel, and for the first time, she did not move. The codicil is explicit, he continued. The title and all estates pass to the nearest legitimate heir of Blackwood blood. A pause, sharper now. Miss Isabel de Courtenay. Victory flashed across her face, brief, uncontrolled. Then it vanished, because she saw them. Not admiration, not approval, judgment, cold, immediate, unforgiving. She had not been revealed. She had revealed herself. No one spoke, but the room had already decided. Alistair stood where he was, stripped of title, stripped of illusion, stripped of relevance. Isabel stood beside him, crowned and already alone. Only then did I move. One step forward, nothing more. I did not look at them. I did not need to. I looked at the room, and this time, they looked back. Not with pity, not with curiosity, with understanding. They had spent 6 years watching me disappear. Tonight, they realized I had never been gone. I had been waiting. Because in a room full of people who survive on appearances, the most dangerous woman is not the one who speaks. It is the one who lets the truth arrive, exactly when no one can escape it. Alistair ceased to exist. He is now simply Mr. Ashworth, a name whispered with contempt, living on a modest pension provided by his mother. He is a ghost who haunts the periphery of a world that has already forgotten him. Isabel is now the Duchess of Blackwood. She has the title, the manor, and the Tears of Blackwood necklace. She also has empty ballrooms and the averted eyes of the entire aristocracy. She won the war for the crown, only to find herself ruling a kingdom of dust. As for me, I am Serafina again. My marriage was annulled by royal decree, my dowry returned with considerable damages secured by a grateful crown, eager to avoid further scandal. I do not attend parties as the main event, but as the honored guest. My counsel is sought, my presence requested. They look at me now and see not a victim, but a strategist. I saw Isabel last week at the Countess of Waverley's winter soiree. She stood near the orchestra, adorned in the Blackwood diamonds, looking magnificent and utterly, profoundly alone. She holds a title, but I hold the power of my own name. She is a cautionary tale whispered over fans. I am the woman who wrote it. For 6 years they watched me sit alone, believing silence was the language of defeat. They learned that night that true power doesn't need to raise its voice. It simply waits for the perfect moment to command the silence of others. The world is full of different kinds of prisons. Some have bars and some have titles. Let me know in the comments which one you believe is harder to escape. And subscribe for more stories from the silent side of the ballroom.